watching closely to Brent, as many of you have, right? Ever since his diagnosis with ALS, I was watching him, and I asked myself, how does a guy who when he learns he has ALS, he starts and leads a life group, okay? He felt the Lord give the baton of leadership from the Ark to Courtney and Tabitha, and they've been doing an amazing job. But he didn't stop ministry, guys. He kept, and as a matter of fact, I think he started going to the jail in Sidney, visiting inmates every week. I know he did that. Maybe you didn't know that. I did, yeah. And again, I just asked myself, how? Why? Why would you do that? And I went to the scriptures. I turned to the scriptures, and again, I told you, I was just kind of wanting to encourage him, and I'm looking at Paul, and the Apostle Paul wrote 4 letters. We have 4 letters of when he was in prison. We've got Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philemon, okay? And I wanted to encourage Brent, but all of us, right? Because all of us, while we might not have ALS, I think we can feel stuck, stuck in our, maybe we feel trapped, whether it is in another disease that you might be having, or feel trapped in a job, or in our life choices that we made, the consequences that we're living with. For some of us, singleness kind of could feel like a type of prison, and I don't mean this funny, parenthood sometimes. If we're honest, it's like, gee, this is really hard. This is really hard. And so yeah, bear with me here. Today's message is just kind of not as polished with time constraints and everything, but I want us to look at the book of Philippians this morning. And next week, I promise, we'll come back to Mark 15, and Lord willing, in the fall, we're gonna hear more from this series. But again, I had Brent in mind when I was making this, and I just felt the Lord tell me, we could use this message this Sunday. And so I also know that Brent would not want an entire sermon about himself, so we're gonna look at Paul, okay? But I want you to be thinking about Brent, but have Paul. Let's look at Paul. So Paul was thrown in prison. Now, first century prisons were not fun. They were not easy. No resort. And many suffered depression in prison. You don't know if you're going to live or die in prison. They could torture you for no reason. The guards could be known to be violent. And that's where Paul found himself. More than once, Paul found himself there. And from a worldly point of view, this is the worst place ever. Like this is the bottom. You hear about rock bottom. I mean, first century prison, that's pretty bad. And yet, what comes out? What comes out of Paul's heart when he's in prison? I think you can tell. I know you can tell a lot about a person when they hit rock bottom. How do they act? What do they say? What do they do when you're watching them? Their true heart speaks. Someone once said, who you are when you're under pressure, when you're getting squeezed, when the chips are down, that's who you really are. That's who you are. And so from these letters, we get a glimpse at Paul's heart. And what do we see? Do we see him complaining? Do we see him writing, help me, get me out of here. This is so bad. This is so hard. No. Some of you might not even known that that Philippians is a prison letter. And now he does mention it near the beginning, and we've got that, Philippians 1:12. Yeah, thank you. I think Shauna and Amy kind of threw this together, so thank you for putting it on the screens if you don't have your Bibles. But this is Paul, verse 12, chapter 1. Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear through the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. I love that people looked at Paul and knew Paul's in jail because of Christ, and that spurred them on, and the fire just kept spreading. I love that. That's how Paul writes about his time in prison. He says, this isn't a setback. We're advancing the gospel now. And this is, again, Paul was absolutely fine talking about his weaknesses. He was absolutely, totally fine with it. Talking about, he wasn't ashamed that he was in prison. He didn't see it as a setback. It's just another space to preach Christ. That's how Paul viewed it, framed it, if you will. And how did he preach Christ in prison? Well, you know, in Philippians, it's so interesting. If you got your Bibles, go to Philippians 2, and you'll see, starting in verse 5, in most Bibles, it's from 5 to 11 is indented. Like it's going. And then 5 through 11 is kind of indented or narrow, or somehow it looks different on the page. If you've ever wondered why that is, it's because scholars think that Philippians 2, 5 through 11 is the earliest hymn that we have. This predates Mark. This is the earliest. Some call it creed that we have, but a lot of people think it was a hymn. It was sung. It was a song, and so right in the middle of Philippians is 4 chapters. Right in the middle, Paul gives the Christians in Philippi a song, Philippians 2. And we're not going to sing them, but let's just read them. Philippians 2, 5, starting in verse 5. We got it in the screens. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage or grasped or held on tightly to. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, and death on a cross. Do you see how low it goes? Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That's a song that the early church, we're talking early church, sang together. And you know, it's super interesting because in the book of Acts chapter 16, we get a glimpse as to how Paul got imprisoned in Philippi. There's a whole story you can read about it, Acts chapter 16. There's a context there, but we've actually, it's just cool because we've got this other vantage point. And in Acts 16:25, we read this. About Paul in prison, we read, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and what? Singing hymns to God, and other prisoners were listening to them. Right? And so, I don't know, but he could have been singing this hymn. Right? This hymn was obviously on his mind. He's in Philippi. In Philippians 2, we've got this song. So again, maybe I'm crazy, but maybe I'm not. Like, what if this hymn that we just, Philippians 2, 5 through 11, what if he was singing that? And it's an amazing story. It's cool what God does there. But now, why is this important? Why am I bringing this up? Okay, Kyle, that's kind of cool. It's a song. But man, sometimes when you find yourself stuck in a prison of sorts, man, there is something powerful about songs, guys. I'm talking, get that Spotify playlist out. Get that mixtape that you had in college. Get when you burn that CD. Get the record, 8-track. I don't know what you got, but I think I know there is power to listening to those old songs that when you first came to know Christ. For me, it's Rich Mullins. Whenever I hear Rich Mullins, I get transported back. And I'm 16, and my friend's telling me about this crazy guy who loved Jesus and sang these amazing songs. And I don't listen to him all the time, but when I'm stuck, I'm telling you, it reminds me of an earlier time in my life when me and Jesus were like this. And so songs, like why every week do we sing? Why? It's because there's something about songs that can get through our defenses. And it can bring us to the gospel, to truth. I remember on Thursday night with Brent, he told me early on, when he first got diagnosed, his song is a Hillsong song. There's another in the fire. And I just blasted that. He probably was tired of me playing it, but I played it for a long time. I wanted him to hear it, that he wasn't alone. There was another in the fire with him. So, point number 1, sing when you're in prison. Sing. That's what Paul did. Point number 2. So the entire chapter 4 of Philippians, do yourself a favor today. Read Philippians 4. It's gold, everybody. It's so good. It's so good. But right at the beginning of Philippians chapter 4, in verse 2, listen to this. Listen, it's so interesting. Paul, what was heavy on Paul's heart is these 2 ladies. And we don't know what was wrong. We don't understand but they were fighting. They weren't getting along, and it grieved Paul's heart. It grieved his heart. And so while in prison, he thought it was important enough to bring up a point about unity in the church. Unity in the church. And he says this, I plead with you, Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of the co-workers whose names are written in the book of life. So it grieves Paul that these women who've worked side by side with him for the gospel, it grieves them that it grieves him that they're not getting along. And so he urges people to help these ladies, forgive each other. They're saved in the Lord. Paul knows that. They know that. Their names are etched in the book of life. And so they've been forgiven by God, so can they forgive each other? Can there be forgiveness there? Can we bury the hatchet? This is Paul in prison, and he's thinking of other people. And he wants unity. So again, he could have been doing he could have been thinking anything, but he's thinking about these ladies. And he realizes because he's in prison, he realizes time is short. Life's too short, ladies. Life is too short. Get over it. Have that conversation. Forgive each other. Let's go. We got work to do. Let's go. We got people that need Jesus. So is there someone that you need to have a conversation with? Have you been putting it off? Have the conversation. Humble yourself. Love the other person. And strive for unity. Next point. Again, there's many, I call them coffee cup verses in chapter 4 because they're just so good. They're the one-liners that you could easily put on a T-shirt or a coffee cup. So good. But I want to talk about one in particular, Philippians 4:13. It's super famous. No doubt you've heard about it, but I want us to think about the background a little bit. So Paul, we know, is in prison, and he's writing to Christians who are living in Philippi, and they're going through a hard time in Philippi. They're getting publicly shamed for their faith in Jesus. And physically, I mean, there's definite physical persecution, and Paul says to them, he says, "I know the secret." And the way Paul writes, it's like he's saying, "Hey, lean in close. I got a secret to tell you. I know the secret of being content in every and all situation." Lean in. Here we go. Jesus. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. That's what Paul says. He says, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." That's what he says. Whatever life throws at me, I know that Jesus walked through it first. It happened to Jesus first. Maybe you feel abandoned, struck down, beaten, tortured, betrayed. Do you feel betrayed? Somebody wronged you? He was looked down upon, judged wrongly. I mean, the list, we could keep going. Well, Jesus went through it first. In a war, if there's a fence and there's a hole in the fence and there's people on the other side with guns, the first one through the fence is the bloodiest. And that's Jesus. Jesus went first. He had it worse than anybody. The most unjust thing happened to him. And so we can take comfort. We can take strength from that. There's a difference there. We can take strength from knowing Christ went first, and he's with me, and I can get through anything. So Paul found himself in prison, and instead of stopping ministering, kicking his heels up, having a rest, having a break, his mind was, okay, if you're going to lock me in prison, great. That'll give me more time to do some deep work. I've got some letters that need written. That's what I'm going to do. He used it as an opportunity. And this short study got me thinking about how many of the best writings in the history of humanity about freedom were written in prison. Do you know that? Just think about it. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his letters. Martin Luther King Jr. letters from Birmingham prison, jail. Nelson Mandela, Walk to Freedom. All of them were written in prison. They're amazing reads. Now, the flip side of that coin, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf in prison. Now, again, I ask you, what are you going to do in prison? Who are you going to become when you're stuck? Right? Because, again, are you going to be a Mandela, MLK, Bonhoeffer? Or you could just as easily turn to become like Hitler. You could let that bitterness, if left unchecked, right? That anger, that violence, you could go there with it. Right? You could just as easily let it fester, and because all you have is time in prison. That's all you have. Again, prison reveals about who you are becoming. Are you going to be people that utilize that time, that reframe it? Are you going to think of others, encourage others, grieve for others that aren't, that you know, hey, unity, everybody. Unity. Come on, ladies. Are you going to be like that? Or are you going to be bitter, full of hatred and violence? It's a choice. It's a choice that Brent had to mentally make. And not only many Christians before him and folks, there's no crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen to you. But might come a time when you're in prison. It's a choice. And again, I want to look, speaking of Bonhoeffer, so if you don't know who Bonhoeffer is, he was a pastor, theologian. I think I've talked about him before. He's a fascinating guy. A pacifist pastor that because of Hitler, because what he saw, what he smelled Hitler was doing with the concentration camps and whatnot, he knew he had to put an end to it, or help to put an end to it. He was one of the group that tried to, this pacifist made a bomb and tried to kill Hitler. Fascinating guy. Anyway, as you know, failed attempt, but Hitler threw him in prison. And he wrote poetry and letters, and this is one of them. It's called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Who Am I? And thank you, man. Yeah, amazing guy. Anyway, I got a poem I want to read, and you can, whenever you got to read poetry. It's really hard to listen, so if you want to follow along, you can. But this is called Who Am I? Here we go. Who am I? They often tell me. I step from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I used to speak to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I bore the days of misfortune equably, smilingly, and proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really that which other men tell of? Or am I only what I myself know of myself? Restless and longing and sick like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voices of birds, thirsting for words of kindness and neighborliness, tossing in expectations of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once a hypocrite before others and before myself a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Oh, man. Did you catch it? Did you catch Bonhoeffer? And I know it's poetry, so again, my first couple times, I'm like, what's going on here? But basically, this isn't rocket science. So Bonhoeffer, he knows what how other people see him as this guy who seems to be in charge of the prison. The way he carries himself and walks around, people are just in awe, like, wow, this guy's amazing. It's like he's not even in prison. But then he's got his inward struggles. Those inward, the enemy, and he's full of doubt and fear and confusion, and he knows that about himself. And he wants to be that other guy that others see. So where does he land? He lands, he identifies with Christ. He is in union with Christ. That's who he is. That's how he knows who he is. He's oscillating between the two, but he knows he is Christ's. Over 100 times. And Paul got it too, right? That was Bonhoeffer, but Paul, 100 times, he talks about union with Christ, right? To live is Christ. To die is gain, he says. In Colossians, another prison letter, he says, my life is hidden with Christ. I'm behind Christ. He sees himself unified with Christ. And that's how he gets through it all. Bonhoeffer did it. Paul did it. Brent did it. There you have it. We've seen Paul in prison. We've seen him singing his songs, and again, I wish it wasn't this way, folks. But suffering makes you shine brighter for Jesus to a watching world. It just does. I wish it didn't, but it does. And so Paul says, sing. Sing in the prison. Sing. And then the second point, he was concerned about church unity. Unity in the church. He wanted these women to bury the hatchet. And then Paul was able to do all of this, not because he was stoic, not because he had a stiff upper lip and he was a man about it. No, he was weak. He wasn't ashamed. He just, this is, I'm in prison. Yep, I'm in prison. My mind, though, is on Christ. Christ was in prison, too, before me. That last night, he was in prison. Right? He identified, he got strength from following Christ closely, identifying himself with Jesus, reframing what his events was going through on in his life, reframing it in light of Christ. And it's there. It's there for every single one of us. I don't know what you're going through. You've got something, I know, but ask the Lord, how did you walk through this, Jesus? I know you did. Can you show me? Can you strengthen me as I'm walking through this? And listen and pay attention. And so So again, his mind was on Jesus, right? Philippians 2. That Jesus, he loved me enough not just to come down from heaven, but he became a man, and not just a man, a poor man, and not just a poor man, someone sentenced to death, and not just someone sentenced to death, but crucified. That's how low Jesus went for me. And when I know that, when I know I'm that loved, friends, you can get through anything. You can get through anything. And then you'll shine. So there's much more we can glean from these prison letters. And Lord willing, we're going to get to them one day. But until then, may we rejoice with our friend Brent, who lived this out for every one of us to see. He lived it out. He did. And now, because of his faith in Jesus Christ, he is worshiping this Sunday morning face to face with his risen Savior. Praise God. Let's pray. Let's pray. God, we love you. We thank you for the Apostle Paul and the wisdom that we can wring out of these verses as we think about spirituality in the dark, as we think about prison and Paul, and just, we scratch our heads on how was he able to do that? Was he superhuman? Was he just as strong? No, it was Jesus. I can do everything, anything through Christ who gives me strength. And God, Paul was just like us. Paul was just like Brent, and Brent is just like us. He's not superhuman. He made mistakes. He was a sinner just like us. And yet, yeah, God, help us, Lord. Help us to be like Paul. Help us, God, through whatever we're facing. And now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, the church. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever and ever. Amen. Amen.